happened. The button was pressed.
The button was pressed. Here we are, possibly in many more contexts now. Yeah. So here we are on a call, and I said something in my message to you, something like, I think the stuff you're doing with Enspiral is like very similar to something that I'm trying to do. And so I want to learn from you, both in the sense of like, what are you guys doing that's working? What are the mistakes that you made and have had to correct? And also, like, what are the things that when I hear you describe you doing them and feeling like, yes, this is what we're doing, I'm like, that seems like not the thing I want to, like, because I think, there've been one or two times when I've got on a call now. I can actually think of two in particular over the last couple months since I've been thinking about stuff, where I've gotten on a call with it where it sounds like maybe somebody's doing the thing already, and then we keep talking, and it's like, nope, that's not my thing. It's close, but it's not my thing. And but like, I signed on to the Enspiral website this morning just as I was getting up, and just had a look, right, like, trying to remind myself what it's doing, and I'm like, well, this again feels like kind of basically the thing, like, I don't know if I would use Medium for blogging, but that's a pretty minor point. um so so yeah, and then I don't know, it's like, what, and then also, I guess, understanding what is the story arc of Enspiral. What does it want to look like 5 years from now? Is it trying to create more of itself, like more instances of itself? How does that connect to your work with the whole microsolidarity thing? And I think there's probably, to whatever extent we get into it today, probably stuff worth saying about kind of power dynamics and stuff like that as they show up in these contexts, because I can only assume, if things are working for you guys, that is, and has been, and have been for multiple years, that's not simply because incidentally everybody who shows up to your group is like all perfectly integrated and has the capacity to stand their ground without taking anybody else's ground, and like all of them already. Because if you did have a pipeline of people like that, I think it'd be a different world already. So so necessarily you guys must be navigating the learning process around how to do that kind of thing. And so I'm interested in how you do that as well. And yeah, and so everything I've just said implies that this conversation might sound like an interview. I'm not assuming that it will. We might just be jamming. And but interviewing can be fun too. So it might be a interview flavored jam or something.
I mean, those questions that you're lining up are like precisely in the center of what I care the most about and what my work has been about. Well, for a long time, but most in focus for the last 4 or 5 years. And like, like I run a training company, and that's what we train on. And and I write and think about this a lot. So it would make sense to interview me about it, because I've kind of got like this whole, massive bookshelf of ideas ready to throw at you. But I'm also open to conversation. But yeah, that's just to say I've got these kind of rants ready to be uncorked, so you might need to interrupt me with some vigor.
Yeah. No, I like bottled rants sometimes.
Yeah, good.
I guess, like, when it's the thing that is the thing, it's like, yes, there's the thing.
It's the thing. It's my whistle that I like to whistle on.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess kind of where do we start is,
I know that what comes up in me always is I really need to own my subjectivity and to hope that I can press upon you a little bit. Like, I'm not going to tell you about Enspiral, like I'm going to tell you about my particular biased personal version of it, which, like, it really is different for a lot of people. And it's kind of like, there's no amount of times I can say that for the point to really land. Like, it's a complex adaptive system.
Yeah. I have some appreciation for that point in general and in relation to stuff like this. And so, maybe one other thing that could come out of this conversation is you recommending one or two other people who have a different vantage point on
Mm,
Enspiral that I might talk with as well
yeah,
and get their take on the shape of it.
yeah.
Yeah. So
And
that
like
feels exciting.
you mentioned power dynamics. It's like I'm in a reasonably high status position in Enspiral.
Yeah.
I and in the world, some of my, I don't know, influence, or I mean, what I get paid for, part of that is the incentives. The incentives are on me to tell you that Enspiral is an amazing place, right? That's basically
Right.
what I'm
Yeah.
getting at.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of conflict of interest, and yeah, it's a good point to talk to some other people and see some of the other sides of it. Maybe, yeah. I mean, you said one of your questions was kind of about the story arc. I could do a quick version of that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of have an implicit sense of it, such that I don't expect to be like super surprised by it. Let me give you one sentence of what I think the story
yeah,
arc is of
yeah.
Inspiral. There's like a couple people who like had some decisions they were trying to make together, and they were like, "What if we like made a Lumio type thing?" But then they were like, "Wait, wouldn't it be good if we had like a meta container to hold that could also hold other stuff?" And then that was Inspiral.
Okay, it's not bad. It's obviously missing some of the context, but
Yeah, yeah,
that's cool. I mean, it's probably useful though to know. I mean, there's all these preceding chapters which I would love to be able to tell, but I don't really feel like I've fully got the story of the ancestors.
yeah.
And it's a project to do one day, is to really map that out. I think it'll be really excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to say, the reason I mention that is because any attempt to make something a bit like a tribe
Yeah,
is going to
has a lot
pass
of
or
deep
fail
context.
depending on its ancestors. Like
Yeah.
trying to bootstrap a new culture from zero is not going to win. But trying to do it with some grandparents already on side, I think is a lot more likely to work. But yeah, some of the chapters that you didn't mention in your version of the story is it started out basically as a freelancer collective where I think before Lumio even started, there was like 100 people at one point.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It was really like there was this kind of boomtown moment of um, I want to work on stuff that matters. I feel stuck in bullshit jobs. I want to be a freelancer. How about we band together and make that less precarious? And that's like 2009, maybe 2010. It's quite a long time ago. And it was called Enspiral Services, this company with I think there
Okay.
was like 100 people floating around. And it's anchored by Joshua Weil, who's kind of like visionary founder, and then Joshua Ford, who's like operations guy who actually counterbalances that enthusiastic visionary character.
Mm-hmm.
And then they bring in Alana Krauss, who's even more like getting shit together kind of a person. And one of the things that, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. There's kind of like a long, I don't even know, maybe 5 years of the downside of that arc, of like having recruited all these people into a big freelancer collective that's trying to do a really collaborative approach to work, like a really shared leadership thing. From my point of view, having never been in that, but just being alongside it, it looked like it was pretty painful for a lot of people, I think it's really hard to get the incentives right on that. And essentially, I think there was basically a couple of people that were fully occupying that position of ownership, meaning losing sleep about the quality of the customer experience and the brand reputation and stuff like that. And then you had 90% of the people enjoying all the benefits of having this awesome freelancer agency, but not actually appreciating the full weight of responsibility of holding that.
Yeah.
And so if there's an anti-pattern of you bring in too many people and they don't actually have visibility on the real responsibilities, and so they don't take full responsibility, then the pattern is break it down into small groups. And so that's basically what happened organically. Was it decomposed into lots of small ventures that like Lumio, for instance.
Okay. Interesting.
So some of them, I mean, this is not the Lumio case, but some of them, they were services companies that then just got smaller and said, okay, this is our little niche, this is our market, we're going to be able to provide a more continuous service in the market. And then other ones like Lumia were more enthusiastic creative people like me hanging around the co-working space and saying, hey, we could start something. So it kind of has this startup incubator feel without any of the actual infrastructure of an incubator besides enthusiasm in a co-working space. And all of that story as well kind of doesn't mention at all that from my point of view, the main thing that's happening is friendship. Just like people caring about each other and showing up for each other in difficult points of their life and celebrating together and, you know, getting married and having babies and sharing houses and things like that. Like that to me is the most significant aspect of the story. There's all of this experimentation we've done with organizational design and changing the world of work and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's just, you know, some people are friends and they go hunting rabbits or they play football, and we're friends and we fuck around with organizational systems.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
I would love to hear more though, like about what what's in your heart and your head, you know, like Enspiral I think is quite vague and so you can see a lot of things in it, but I'd love to hear your
Right.
version of your
Yeah,
story.
and that's such a great point, you know, and it's like I've sent the documents I sent you to you know, over a dozen people at this point, and some of them have sort of just been whatever, but like, you know, there's a bunch of people I've got that have been like, wow, yeah, this sounds like the thing, but like how many of those people actually want the thing that I would actually want to do, and how many just want something vaguely resembling the description I gave, you know?
Yeah.
Um and so yeah, so I guess um for me this emerged out of a couple of different convergent paths, starting a bit over a year ago. One of them was a conversation that got talking about kind of um, the game B economy. The idea of there being the way that I like to think about this is like a country has an economy, and a country has imports and exports, and it doesn't need to make everything that it needs itself, but it can become richer by being able to make something that people in all the other countries want a lot, and then they like want that country's currency and they kind of buy in. And it can also become richer by uh itself being something that people want to be a member in,
Mm.
right? You know, if a rich person migrates to a country, or and that could be rich in, you know, money, or it could be rich in skills or whatever, you know, but like migrates to a country, that country becomes richer. Like there's a wealth there, and so there's a bit of you know, zero sumness to that, but there's also lots of generativity involved, right? And and so I was sort of asking myself, like, what would it look like to envision a virtual economy? And this came up in a conversation with some friends. Like I don't I didn't have all of the original idea myself. But in Peter Koenig's source model, they didn't seem to be doing much with the idea. So I was like, well, I'm gonna like go out there and put this idea, you know, on the line and try to make it happen, and I will then be source of at least that instantiation of the idea. Um, and so yeah, but the image of kind of like a meta organization within which there are, you know, companies and, you know, nonprofits and other unofficial teams and stuff like that, and all of these subgroups would do something like, you know, be making money, you know, not necessarily all immediately, or you know, some of them might do other stuff, but a kind of network organization that would then also would somewhat help internally, right? You know, I'm sure the folks at you know, Optimi or whatever might use Lumio for their whatever. You know, they would supply services internally, just like here in Canada. Some of the milk that I drink is like made in Canada. Most of it, I think, in fact, it's like Canada creates a lot of milk, and and so then so some internally, but then also lots of exports
Mm.
to the world at large, which would want the kinds of things that this, you know, collective would
Yeah.
create. And then as these businesses made money, they would contribute some of that money kind of into the whole, somehow, and that part's very unspecified in my vision currently. And it's important to get the details of that right, but it's subject to it working. I don't have a clear sense of what it ought to be. It just needs to be the thing that actually works.
Yeah.
um like that's sort of not the important part in one sense, even though it's vital that it work,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so so that's one chunk of it. And then the other chunk is having actually really fluid boundaries between those sub organizations, because there are people, and I think I'm one of them, who whose like most advantageous um, uh, capacities are not ones that are well leveraged by, or that no, they're not ones that a given company or organization or team needs 40 hours of in a given week. And so it's like wanting to be able to have people do strategic visioning for 10 companies at once, like helping them with their design of their whatever and their, this kind of thing, if that's something that like they each need a few hours of a week, or um, and so people could move around based both on the skills that they have and want to sh- and in particular the things that feel really life-giving or self-energizing to do, the things that like doing them takes less effort than not doing them. It's like, can we make a bunch of companies patchwork composed of that? Like composed of people mostly doing that which is easier to do than not do. Because it's like, well, then at that point, like yeah, people want money for stuff, but they only need whatever money they need to like live and thrive, not just survive and all that. And maybe even, oh, this person needs a whole bunch of money to buy a house to do blah blah blah. But but the point is, like, it at the point when you've got that energy powering what you're doing, there's the money takes on a totally different role in such an organization. And a lot of it would be going into, well, what else can we make happen with the money that we're generating from these various ventures? And and that would create lots of space for um, people to be starting new things that it's unclear how they're going to make money, but it's just, well, I got to do this, like I got to make this app exist, or I've got to you know like create this website that integrates all this different information about whatever, like I just got to do it. And then you can sort of figure out the monetization later or whatever. Um and there would be sort of space to do that. Um and and that feels very alive for me, because I feel like somebody who wants to be doing a kind of designing and visioning in many organizations at once, but like I can't just it's somewhat possible to do that on a consulting basis, but it doesn't feel the same,
Yeah.
um including that, like, I want to be more entangled in the upside. um Not, but I don't just want to like have shares personally in, I mean, that would be cool. I would be down to do consulting for random companies and get tiny fractions of shares that eventually blah blah blah, but like, but I want it to be more juicy than that. The other thing, of course, is that like like Keegan talks about in an everyone culture, you could have people who are moving from one org or one position to another, not because it's like, oh, this is the thing that I am like, super good at, but actually I want to learn this thing and I'm not super good at it. But I really want to learn it. Like, can I dive into a role that's going to demand me learn it, while being able to perform at that role well enough that I'm not disrupting things by being there not knowing what I'm doing, like being kind of held in that. And so a huge part of the whole thing is just like, how do we create a meta organization where people can unlearn their learning trauma from school? Um, and so I've been prototyping this a little bit with uh, like with Complis. A friend of mine, George, did a fellowship with Complis basically last summer, where for 12 weeks, the way that we set it up was like, for 12 weeks, you're going to aim to do, George is going to aim to do, something like, I don't know, some number of Pomodoros that worked out to about 20 hours a week or something like that. And and we don't know at the point when we initiated, we don't know how much he's going to get paid, but we're going to um but he is going to get paid every 2 weeks, and we're going to have a conversation every 2 weeks to decide how much to pay him, like collectively, just feel into that. And so there was all these really rich things coming up of where he was like, I feel like I made this dumb proposal this week, so you should pay me less. And I was like, well, but that dumb proposal led to this really rich conversation, which wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I think that conversation was worth, like, all of this amount, which is not to say you should get that, but it's like, I'm not going to punish you for having brought this thing. Like, how are we framing any of, and so we were able to just really play in that space and genuinely find, like, oh yeah, here's a trauma from when I was 11, and here's a, a fear that I've got that's causing me to get all kind of, and really just seeing the working environment as an opportunity to um untangle all that kind of stuff. And um yeah, I think that is most of a spiel.
Yeah.
um I guess the one last bit I'll say is that I have some specific frameworks, and meta frameworks around how to go about doing that untangling in a way that really works,
Hmm.
um, and in a way that, like, maximizes both, in some sense, maximum, whatever that means. The sort of the throughput of stuff actually happening. So it's not like you have to get it all out of the way before you can do stuff, but also that really doesn't paper over any of the things. I was on a call recently with some people who, um, uh, I was watching them have a tension live on this call, about the thing they were organizing, and I wrote in my notes, like, okay, so that guy's now left. Are they ever going to come back and like uh grieve that disconnect that they had, and say, you know hey, I didn't want to be blasting you, I was triggered, I didn't, like, and rebuild that trust? Like, are they going to do that? And I was genuinely just not sure. Like, I didn't know enough about the organization to know what to expect on that front. It sounded like it was a pretty ongoing challenge that these co-founders were having, and that they had a kind of peace with, but you could still have a kind of peace, and
Yeah.
whatever with it, without it actually ever getting untangled.
Yeah.
um and that adds huge friction, if not an actual explosion, uh long term.
Yeah.
So uh yeah.
I mean, what you're describing is a pretty good match for what we're trying to do at Enspiral, I think,
Hmm.
um, which is good. um, and this thing about the trauma, in my perspective, is kind of one of the main things, that like, if you think about a spectrum of organizing, where on the left hand side you have domination and you organize by ranking, like you have
Hmm.
the best person is at the top, and then they have more influence, progressively down the chain until you have the worst person who is just doing what they're told. When I
Right.
say best or worst, I mean, most important,
Yeah,
highest paid.
yeah, the most superlative
Yeah, yeah.
person.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the partnership model, where instead of ranking, you're linking. It's just about what are all these different connections, and connections are multidimensional and they're dynamic. And you're like, there's not really there are these temporary moments where, like, like, you might be better at programming than me, sure, but you're not a better person than me. It's like that. There's some, we allow for the fact that there's these different dimensions where there's some kind of temporary ranking that makes sense, but in our essential, like, what's most important about us, like, the entitlement to genuinely being heard and to have free expression of your genuine what's going on for you, like, everyone should equally experience that. I think there's these kind of principles of equality which are pretty important. Like, if those are the two ends of the spectrum of how we can organize, more like ranking or more like linking,
Hmm.
obviously it sounds a lot nicer to be doing the linking one, right? Like where we're just getting to know each other and making connections and we move around and we're dynamic. But why is that not more common? Why is it that the vast
Yeah.
majority of organizations in the world are organized by ranking? And I think it's because of trauma. Like I think it's a self-perpetuating pattern, you know, and I really, really love the work of Riane Eisler, and she documents in history how it hasn't always been that way. Like there are alternative ways to structure societies and families and organizations. But that once you're in the ranking mode, it's really hard to get out of it because it's self-perpetuating. So like the lessons that were taught to me as a boy growing up in a patriarchal culture, I can't just switch that off, you know, like that's what you say, it's an untangling process.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's like, well, if we're trying to construct an alternative, but we're using crooked timber, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do we sort that out? That has to be a big part of the work, I think. It's like creating context where people can grow and heal.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be, that doesn't have to be on the tin, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to say that on the label. This is a space for healing and growth.
Yeah.
Because that's going to attract a certain dimension of people. But those spaces need to be happening, you know, like you say, that people can, that there's a kind of communication culture where you're allowed to say, hey, I was really triggered and I blasted you for no good reason, and I'm genuinely sorry, and you know, can we clear this out? Can we, you know, be normal
Can we
about it?
reconcile?
Yeah. And so that to me is like, I actually spend most of my time talking and thinking and working on that side of the work that needs to happen, because it seems to be so underdone in most organizing contexts. You know, that there's so little safety in organizations, there's so little honesty and vulnerability and authenticity that's happening in most groups, that's usually the place to have the most wins. And you know, I don't know you well, but I know some of the circles you roll in, and I'm guessing that you are up for that kind of communication, that you're already sort of playing that game a little bit, so it won't be
Totally.
so
Yeah.
foreign to you. So there's that whole dimension, which is just social fabric. It's like getting to know each other. And in the Enspiral context, one of the main ways that happened, I mean, there's the kind of first layer of social fabric, which is we had a co-working space and you go and hang out and, you know,
Yeah.
you meet people. But as it's decentralized in space, what's become more important, I think, is the retreats. So once a year, there's a big retreat. And that is a kind of, you know, it becomes, I think it plays for us, it plays almost like a festival role, you know, like a holy date in the calendar, you know, that it's something that I mark my life by, is the passing of Enspiral retreats, and the growth that I feel that I've experienced that's marked by those things. And part of that retreat is like, yeah.
I was just gonna say, how many people would have been at those retreats over the last few years?
I guess maybe it would be a lot. It would be maybe like 1,000 people have participated at some level. Mostly a retreat is like, the big ones are like 100 people. It's more common that they're about 70. And then we also have smaller ones in the wintertime, which might be like 20 or 30 people. But there's something that happens there that shifts things for people, you know. I mean, and I'm seeing it now more, you know, like on the Stoa and Rebel Wisdom and other kinds of digital campfires, where people are experiencing a kind of communication that it untangles stuff, you know, like it's that profound sense of communitas, that connection, that experience of the collective mind being bigger and more creative and compassionate than any individual. Like, I'm seeing people start to have that experience, and that's what we were cooking at Enspiral retreats. It's like having a circle experience, which is really profound for someone, and that's where a lot of the trust comes from, right? Like that's where the commitment comes from. It's like, there are some people at Enspiral that I've sat in circle with for 10 years now and heard stories from their grandparents and stories about their children, and some of the, just, you know, their deepest values, the things they care the most about, the parts that hurt them the most. And they've heard my stories too. You know, there's that just that depth of social fabric, that depth of knowingness of each other, that creates not just an ease of collaboration because we kind of know each other and we're more forgiving of each other's foibles, but also just that sheer commitment, like we've been through shit together, and so we're going to keep going through shit together. That's why it works. So there's that massive whole thing about social fabric, and just being intentional, especially if you're working in Zoom land. Like cultivating social fabric doesn't just come by magic, like you actually have to design for it.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the puzzle was all about how do you learn? How do you iterate? How do you grow? How do you try stuff out, fail rapidly? And this is just kind of basic startup stuff now. It's like, it's entrepreneurship. It's like, how do you design experiments, test them quickly, get actual concrete lessons out of it instead of just your subjective wishes and feelings. That's what I love working in the marketplace for, is because the market proves like if people care about your thing or not in a really
totally.
unrelenting way.
It's like I tried making a chart with a friend of mine a while ago that was like, I forget what were the axes. The vertical axis was like to what extent is what you're doing like totally constrained by rules, or to what extent is it like real? And then the horizontal axis was like, I'll do it like this so we can both look at the same version. It was like the horizontal axis was like, what to what extent is somebody trying to outwit you versus are you just like coming up against the like facts of reality, right? And so war is in the bottom left, and you want to avoid that. And in the top right is arbitrary rules and nobody's trying to outwit you, which is like school. And you want to avoid that.
Yeah.
But in the top left, you've got sports, like people are trying to outwit you, but sports are any kind of competitive game. People are trying to outwit you, but there's rules, so it's safe. And in the bottom right, you've got science, like actual science, like not academic science, which is much more up and actually includes people trying to outwit you too. Like people competing with you for tenure and all that, but actually just researching is in the bottom right. You're like, nobody's trying to outwit you. You're just like staring at reality, trying to figure it out. And so there's this kind of corridor between the top left and bottom right. It's got juicy stuff in it. And somewhere in the middle there is business, right? People are kind of trying to outwit you, but not really. I mean, your competitors don't really want to sink you, except in as much as they're afraid of their own well-being. I mean, that's kind of war too, but sort of. But anyway, but
it's not mortal war,
right? And so your competitors are happy if they can just get you to pivot to some other business they're not in, or even better if they can get you to become the complement to what they're doing, and then now like you're a commodity and they're so yeah, I don't know, there's something kind of in that space. I forget what you were saying that was relevant to that, but
well, about iteration and learning, and that's
right, and the realness of business that you like, you can't fake it. It's like well, I mean, you can fake aspects of it, but it's an arena in which you can fake it to investors, but it's an arena in which if you are genuinely trying to figure out if what you're doing matters and is working, you can tell. It's apparent.
Yeah, I mean, this is really important, the outwitting thing, actually, because like I got into this through Lumio. So it's a software platform. We're trying to like get people communicating and doing some small scale democracy stuff. And everyone we talk to about it is like, great idea, love it, absolutely love it. We did a crowdfunding campaign, we raised a bunch of money, we pulled a team together, we built a platform. But we're competing against Facebook,
Right, yeah.
And Facebook is just so superpowered that it doesn't matter how much people say they care about democracy and open source and taking care of each other and stuff. Like, you're competing against this thing which has just such immense resource that I feel like I had to at a point kind of go like, you know what, I don't even want to compete on that landscape anymore. I want to move somewhere else where I feel like I've got something more of an advantage compared to what else is happening. So that's like, now my business is about training people in collaboration and collaborative culture and stuff. It's like, I actually know how to do that better than most other people in the market. And it's
Right.
exciting to be in that position, you know, finding that spot of the market of like, oh, we're actually among the best in the world at this. And that feels awesome. I would rather, you know, I feel it would be more impactful if we could make Lumio as big as Facebook. But I don't actually have the resources or the knowledge of how to do that yet. And the market is what took me on that journey. And I really
Right.
appreciate
Yeah.
that, you
Yeah.
know?
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And it's like, and you know, the work that you're doing with the training and collaborative culture might swing back around, whether that's because you have customers who now want to use Lumio. You know, maybe you get a contract from some large company actually who's like, okay, new thing.
Yeah.
All 1,000 people in this thing are going to use like Lumio Prime, you know, which doesn't exist yet, but like they would work with you to develop it. And then at the point when you've got that contract, that lets you, you know, scale to get other big. What I don't know if that's the thing you want. I mean, at all. But like, you know, as one sort of kind of example. And I like how you said, you know, we don't have the resources to take on Facebook yet.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
like it's just like, well, okay, yeah, how do we go about doing that?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
both in
that's,
terms of the creativity and in terms of just the raw capital of like what might be required,
yeah.
including intellectual
And
capital.
I think it's really useful to think about capital on tons of different dimensions as well. Someone showed me a diagram yesterday. I don't know who the illustrator was, but they had all these different kinds of capital, and one of them was called space capital, as in the ability to hold space. You know, like to really just
Yeah.
yeah, you know what holding space is, right? Like being
Yeah.
okay with what's coming, not knowing what it is, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's lots of different kinds of capital, and one thing that I've really enjoyed in the game-like aspect of the Enspiral process is noticing. I mean, we're still here 10 plus years later. We must have something. We must have some kind of capital in high supply that other people don't have. And the main one that I latched onto is belonging. It's like, oh, there's a like rapidly increasing crisis of belonging. People really feel alienated to the extreme, and it just keeps getting worse. And if you can give people the experience of belonging and in a genuine way, you know, when it starts reaching down into their cells, uh, that's going to produce a degree of commitment and engagement and readiness to share. And, you know, like there's just so much opportunity to anyone that knows how to play the belonging game. And even saying, you know, it feels kind of creepy to say a game because you think of game as manipulation. You know, I don't mean it in that way, but like to genuinely meet people's belonging needs, you know, in a reliable way. That's a huge advantage over just about everyone out there at the moment.
Yeah. It's an interesting one too, because, you know, I've at times in what I've been doing been kind of like nervous that if something was too good at the belonging thing and didn't have the other pieces sorted
Mm.
out,
Mm.
then you just get people who like I mean, this is the way that a purpose-driven organization can become taken over by people who just want to hang out, you
Yeah.
know, or for
Yeah,
instance,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like and yeah, I guess I'm curious
Yeah,
how
I mean,
you
this
think
is
about that.
this is the balance of being and doing, and it's essential. It's one of these. It's the same kind of feeling as like the balance between freedom and form. You know, the being and doing thing. I reckon a lot of it is about, you know, like you were asking right at the start. Do we have a pipeline of highly developed people? Not exactly. What we have is New Zealand. That's part of it. It's just like a more peaceful and less traumatized country than most places. So the
Yeah.
baseline is better. It's kind of like
Yeah.
Scandinavia in that regard. Better actually in some ways, less lonely. And then what we have is just really a lot of filtering.
Yeah.
There's a lot of filtering, and it's kind of implicit. It's kind of hard to see where the filters are, but they are definitely present. So a big part of it is that it's by invitation only. There's no
Right.
front.
Yeah.
There's no front door where you say, "I would like to be in an Enspiral, please." To say, "Okay, good luck to you." But like, you get into an Enspiral when you have meaningful relationships with people in the middle, and they think that you would be cool, and they invite you in. And that's an exclusive thing that's triggering for some people to hear. You know, but like that's how
Right.
we
But
filter
that's
out the
also
assholes.
that's also just like how many systems work already. Like, you know, you don't get to just like join someone's family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like you've got to like, you know, fall in love with somebody in the family and marry them or equivalent right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can't, oh, your family's so exclusive. I like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's my family. It excludes those who are not in my family. um duh.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like, and I actually talk about this in something very similar in one of the things that one of the pieces that I sent you, uh, where I talk about different kinds of membranes, like fully
Mm.
closed membranes, where basically everyone in the group needs to like say yes, you can come in, something like that, sort of like
Yeah.
really really
Yeah.
closed. And then membranes where someone in the group kind of has to welcome you in or something like that. And then membranes that you can kind of just join like by showing up or by participating in some shared behavior or something like that.
So this is really important that you name that, because that's the specific design that we actually use at Enspiral that I think has been really successful. There's limitations to it, but
Hmm.
there are two membranes. So there's the big boundary. It's like, well, I have to maybe I have to explain the inner circle first. So I'm a member.
Literally my document goes, I guess I better explain the inner circle like first. So it's like, yeah.
So I'm a member, which means that I've been approved by the supermajority of the other members to join. And there's like usually about 30 of us. And it takes ages to become a member, because you have to build genuine relationships with a lot of people. They have to see you perform in different circumstances. They have to see how you perform in a crisis. What do you like when it comes to accountability? Like when you get
You said
called out, how
it
do you
takes
respond?
8 years to become a member?
No, I said ages.
Oh,
Ages. It's
ages.
just a long time.
Yeah.
Minimum a year, but often, yeah. I mean, and there's lots of people that don't even want to get there necessarily, but it's like,
Yeah.
this is a very high threshold. But as a member, the main thing that I get is the ability to invite anyone into the outer circle, which would be a contributor. And your screen is frozen, so I wonder if you're back. You're back.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was saying that I'm a member. It took a long time to get to that threshold, and the main payoff is that I get to invite new contributors, and the contributor is the outer circle. And that the way it currently works, I've got complete autonomy to make that decision. So I meet Malcolm and I say, Malcolm's what a ruler. You'd be a good fit here. Come on in. And that combination of two membranes has been so stable and so effective at filtering. And it also puts a natural limit on the growth. So like we've never really been, there's these kind of moments of fluctuation, but around 200 people, because you can only have so many members because you need to know everyone to like get in the circle. And the members will only invite people that they know. And so that really limits how many people are there, which means you've got a Dunbar sized group, which means that you can govern by social fabric instead of by artificial rules. Primarily, it's primarily the relationship and the dialogue that's doing the governance more so than the protocols. And there's policing. There's extremely low policing. That's a peculiar thing about our group. Extremely low. And there is some protocol, definitely, like I just described, right? These membranes, that's protocol.
Right, totally. But it's a very basic structure. Like it's a very basic scaffold on which the living system can grow and like the winter comes and this goes there and more grows yeah.
So one of your questions at the start as well was, what does Enspiral want to be in 5 years? And it's a bit like, I don't know, what does your family want to be in 5 years? Probably still your family, right? Like
right.
Maybe a bit different.
yeah. And one possible answer to that might be, something related to the comment about like taking on like a larger, more more viable Lumio something, for instance.
Yeah. Well, basically, my approach has been, I mean, this is one of the great things I love about Enspiral. It's like, Enspiral doesn't have agency, people have agency. Enspiral doesn't want anything. It's not going anywhere. The people are going places. And it always, somehow there's something in the culture and the structure that always reminds me of my own agency. And it's like, it's just exhausting. and kind of impossible to try and get the whole group to agree on a direction, but I can just do my own thing and invite people. And if it's a cool thing, people will come with me.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where microsolidarity comes from. It's this like, Enspiral has been very meaningful to me. I suspect that other people would find something like that extremely meaningful. We can't just grow Enspiral to include everyone. So how do we start more Enspirals? What are the basic patterns? Where do you start? And that's why the whole focus is like, get the social fabric going, everyone. Here's some basic patterns for social fabric. And once you've got that, then start talking about money and then figure it out from there. If you've got trust and then you're trying to do business, you'll design your own structure that makes sense. And I think that's, as far as I can tell so far, that's sufficient.
Yeah. And when you say, as far as I can tell so far, it's like, how many things have you seen starting to kind of plant the seeds of becoming another Enspiral like thing?
I don't know. I think there's probably about 30 or 40 communities that are explicitly referencing microsolidarity, and most of them are in contact with me.
Yep.
But even when I wrote the original proposal, the reason it was well received was people saying, we're already doing this, Rich. But thank you for the language, like that was the contribution. It wasn't the idea. It was just the like drawing in the boundaries. So I think it's a self-organizing movement that's already out there. I happen to have this particular lens onto it, but there's lots of other lenses as well that are immediately adjacent to each other. So a lot. I think a lot. I think it's a generational thing. I think this is actually the sort of, DAO, decentralized organizations, crypto technology revolution is actually these communities of entrepreneurship and purpose. I think that's where it's really driving. And some of them maybe are going to have a blockchain on them, but that's nowhere near the first objective.
How many or no, what was I going to ask? I mean, I was thinking about this in relation to me and you as well, specifically, but I could also ask it in relation to these other 30 to 40 communities. What's your take on what differentiation looks like between those communities? I mean, one very simple one is like, well, everybody has a family, and which family you're in is partially just a contingent thing of who you happen to know and end up in and whatnot. But, are we going to see flow of people from one microsolidarity org to another because of some deeper shared vision and values? I mean, or because they fall in love with somebody who's in the other one, whether that's business love or romantic love. And what is that going to look like? I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things one of the advantages of having shared language. It's one of the things that, microsolidarity as a word and a set of words actually affords for the ecosystem is something like a passport. It's like, you're part of my extended family. Because they look really different. Just before I had the language for it, traveling around, meeting people and being like, oh, right, you're one of us. It was really hard to say what one of us was. Like, there's not really a good word for it. And this is one way of creating that recognition, that people can go like, oh, okay, you're part of the team. And so I do anticipate that will, it sort of can't help but produce a lot of opportunities. Like you were saying with your economic, like the country metaphor, it's like there's a reason that we have the European Union, like there's a reason that we have these trade agreements, because when you can coordinate at a greater scale, you've got access to all kinds of efficiencies and benefits that you can't when you're constrained to a smaller scale. But that to me is like, this is where we start edging onto the speculative territory where I'm like, oh, let's just focus on like, can we actually get the small scale working reliably totally. And stably? And then we'll have this great convocation where we invite everyone to come together, and that'll be awesome.
Right, like a grand retreat that's not just Enspiral, it's, boop, 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 and they're all,
as you say that, I'm like, and you've already got like Burning Man. Can we just reverse engineer Burning Man so that it starts producing all of these Enspirals? You know what I mean?
Right, totally. I was thinking about Burning Man when you described the Enspiral Festival, and I was thinking, Burning Man is a really interesting context because it's, it's action hippies, right? They're building giant marvels of engineering, right? Not just, showing up and chilling and what, I mean, there are people like that too, but well, and there's people who do one and then the other, they show up for build week and then they're just chilling the whole week. But like, and Burning Man has a kind of cultural scaling impact
Yeah.
that permeates out through things. Um, and it has an impact in terms of people probably start companies with people that they meet at Burning Man, and it's all of that kind of stuff. But it's like, what would it look like to have something that was, if this is a music festival and this is Burning Man, like what would this look like? Like what's over
Yeah.
here in some dimensional space of like uh even further towards the making doing like
Yeah.
ongoing year-round community thing. um and it sounds like Enspiral is somewhere in that space, right? And yeah, that's
I mean,
really
I
cool.
think I think the distinction is just like less whimsy, you know. Like, I mean, I'm all about the whimsy and go and enjoy yourselves. It's good to have a release and have these like
Right,
spontaneous,
but Burning Man
ephemeral
is like
experiences.
Burning Man's like full fractal whimsy,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Whereas it's like, okay, that's good, but how about instead of what's the most trippy experience I can create? How about it's how do I create a good livelihood for me and my friends?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then okay, we get together once a year and we have an awesome party, and then we get back to like creating this livelihood.
Yeah.
That that's kind of the difference. It's a little bit more boring.
Right. Yeah. But then it's also, you can do it all year, which Burning Man, like, part of the whole point is how unsustainable it is
Yeah,
in a sense. And
yeah,
that's part of its beauty, right? And especially in a world where there's all these conversations about sustainability, including at Burning Man, there is something neat about having this thing which is so opulent in its in this temple that takes a month to build burns down in a night. The man who takes a week or two to build or whatever just burns down in a night. But a bunch of other things just burn down. And the amount of resources that go into making that week possible are many months of various people's income and like investment capital and like and even just like it's this kind of giving people a taste of abundance
mm.
by everybody bringing like twice as much as they need to the playa. And so you temporarily have an economy that has too much. And that's part of that, is both a cause and effect of it being a gift economy,
Yeah,
right? Because it's a gift economy, you can just bring a lot and try to get rid of and try to give it all away in a way that would be somewhat inconvenient if you felt like you
yeah,
had to sell it, or
yeah.
like and like compete on price and blah. Instead, you can just be like, no, there's going to be 10,000 grilled cheese sandwiches. um
I mean,
and
so you mentioned power dynamics right at the start.
yeah, yeah.
I have to say, I haven't been to Burning Man, but I've been to regional burns,
Mhm.
and I'm cool enough that I got drugs for free, but I saw people paying for drugs. And that
Right,
to
yeah,
me is like, that goes right to the lie of the gift economy. That
yeah,
you've just replaced financial capital with social capital. It's got
yeah.
different dynamics. There's
Less
lots of
legible,
advantages,
less legible
but
capital. Yeah.
and less legible means less accountable. And accounting is not all
Right.
bad.
No, no, totally, totally.
And so this is where it's like, and I'm mentioning that because I'm not trying to be holier than thou. It's like it's the same with Enspiral. You know, it's like you can do all kinds of creative things about creating a new culture, but you're still gripped in our conditioning and our mainstream culture of
Yeah,
domination and
yeah,
like hierarchy that you
and you
can't
get
just
this
switch it off.
you get this other thing, like one of the things that one of the phrases I found most useful the last year is "in the meantime." It's like, okay, yeah, yeah, we'll create a post scarcity economy. What do we do in the meantime?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, 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 sure, I got you, Karl Marx. Like, there'll be a total thing where everybody has control over the everything together collectively. What do we do in the meantime? And it's like, well, the best answer that the Russians had to that was the Soviet shit show. And it's like, well, that's not a very great meantime. In fact, I think it's sufficiently bad that it's not ever going to make it to Karl Marx's vision. um you know um and so it's sort of like, to take a kind of crunchy, challenging example, it's like, okay, there's conversations you can't have and trust you can't build until somebody has a certain amount of personal sovereignty.
Mhm.
But how do you create the necessary boundaries and membranes to hold them from reducing what's possible in other contexts while they don't have that, while not generating not just a sense of exclusion, but a sense of wrongness
Mm.
in their system about who they are, or even a sense of not necessarily fundamental wrongness, but just, oh, am I not allowed to have friends until I process all my trauma? Like, that's a whole thing. Do I not deserve love until I've untangled my childhood conditioning? Like, those structures can show up in ways where the other people aren't intending to punish, but there's still a sense of like, well, in the meantime, we don't know what to do with you, so you're on your own. And yeah, in the meantime, you're not going to take responsibility for all other 7 billion
Yeah.
people. But there's this thing where it's like, how do you navigate someone's partner or someone's sister or someone's like uh old co-founder or whatever, like, and you do actually need to navigate that
Yeah.
and those relationships and so on.
Yeah. There's this really, I'm really inspired by this podcast, Finding Our Way by Prentice Hemphill. And they, I'm not sure of their pronouns. They talk about boundaries being the closest distance at which I can simultaneously love you and love myself. And so like, that's the answer. It's boundaries. It's like some people you can love both you and them when they're really, really close. Other people, I can't love myself while I'm also loving you when you're close to me. Like you're you move me out of my zone of where I lose my sovereignty with, like people that have got really extremely high needs. It's just like, I'm just going to have to keep you at a distance.
Yeah.
And when it comes to
podcast is that?
Finding Our Way, Prentice Hemphill. I was really inspired. It's kind of like, I'm sort of seeing it as the emerging current of what's next in the world of social justice. That's like not caught in the grip of some of the fundamentalist memes, but it's something really creative and complex and trauma informed and
nice,
spiritual. And and I was really excited to discover it. It's like, oh, of course, it's like basically Black feminists. It's like, of course, that's where the front edge is coming from. It's not from all of the like boring old white dudes that I'm listening to. But yeah, I mean, and then actually this thing about boundaries, I think really it's crucial to when it comes to designing a community or an organization like this. You don't want, I mean, frankly, and like trigger warning, but you basically want to avoid the problem of having to deal with allegations of serious abuse. Like once you get yourself in the position where you're having to invent a new kind of judiciary and a new kind of police force, you've just welcomed in the hardest problems in the world. And the chance of you doing a better job than the state is pretty low, I think, because those problems are hard for a reason. And it's like, how can you design the interactions so that, I mean, first, there's a lot of enculturation around consent and treating each other well and so on. But also there's a kind of privacy and people are not being overly vulnerable. They're not sharing more than they can. And you're not taking responsibility for every interaction between every person, that you sort of let the state handle what the state's got to handle. That's crucial. I mean, this is a pretty advanced challenge. This is the kind of thing you hit in year 7 or something, but I see it in the burn communities where they start constructing a judicial system and it's like, good luck with that. Like in that case, it's just kick them out. Sorry, we know you're not going to get the best kind of justice out there in the world, but trying to do a better job in here, I mean, we could just completely sink all of our resources into trying to give you a great experience. And I think it's just worth erring on the side of safety and being exclusive as a result.
So concretely, push comes to shove, say that one person, and this is a bit of a weird hypothetical, right? But like say that one of the contributors says that they got repeated unwanted sexual advances from one of the members. What happens?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely rare that that's happened in our history, and there's a reason for that. It's like
Mhm.
who is in the member circle and who's in the contributor circle, that there's a really high standard of ethics in both of those
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
So there's a reason that's hypothetical, and there's maybe a few things that I don't know about, but
Well, and that's, I mean, that's part of what's weird about these things, is that there's ways of going about making it not happen in the first place that actually just make it never get talked about in the first place. You know, that kind of thing. And the
yeah,
person eventually leaves, and it still never gets talked about, or
yeah,
so, it's something like that. You know, it
yeah,
doesn't get. But um, anyway, the thing I was trying to point out was, like, trying to understand, like, are you saying that, like, you know, say it was two contributors that had some huge shit show with each other, you know,
yeah.
would they just be kicked out of the group?
I mean, there was someone that I interacted with in the space a few months ago, and they really just gave me the creeps. And so
Mm-hmm.
my response was to notify the other members and say, there's this new person in the space. This is the experience that I had. Can you keep an eye out?
Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of them made the effort to interact with that person. And it's like the bouncers are in force, you know. And if you're outside of the member circle, you'd never know this is happening. But we're discreetly like keeping an eye out, and that just means there's an extra sort of vigilance and readiness to enforce our community boundaries if necessary. And in this case, it's like the person just organically left anyway because there's like a yeah, it's normal for people to leave. There's kind of like these check-in points where it's normal to, you know, I didn't really get a lot of
Yeah.
value here, so I'm out. But if they had stuck around, they would just be under scrutiny, and it just means that if anyone saw a behavior that they would thought was questionable, there would be someone there immediately ready to step in
Mm.
and ask what this is about, and if necessary, initiate like a conflict resolution, or just immediately kick them out. I mean, that's the other thing that the members are doing. It's like a cultural fire brigade.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And so that's part of the other difference between the, you know, members and contributors, is there's a different kind of, um, yeah,
It's
authority
responsibility.
there and responsibility. Yeah.
I'm going to have to wrap up our conversation pretty soon
Yeah.
because I've
Yep.
got the minimum viable board meeting for Enspiral.
Cool. Well, this has been incredibly rich, and I think it would be very cool to post this somewhere. Yep. And
Like the internet.
yeah, yeah,
Great
like
idea.
the
Good concept.
yeah. We should invent an internet to post it to.
Yeah. Yeah.
A world wide web.
Maybe you should start a meta organization to invent this.
That seems, yeah, seems wise. You got any advice?
I think we did pretty well avoiding the worst of abstractions today. We just stayed at the level that I'm really comfortable with.
Yeah,
Now we've
yeah.
just ruined it.
The outtakes. We could edit that and put it at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I mean, broadly, just like the feeling I get is like, okay, you know, there's still a lot of more deep nitty gritty that we could dive into, but broadly, the sense I'm getting is like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do my thing, and I'll just like check in with you periodically and let you know what I'm doing and what tangles I'm running into, and find more about how you guys are doing it. I love the basic structure of member contributor. I think there's probably a version of that that would be super tight for what I'm wanting to do, and is one of the sort of unanswered questions that I have. So I feel like I've got a more kind of immediate type of possible clarity there. I at least have like a different answer in the space that like feels juicier than the other ideas that I'd had, or even just more concrete. And yeah.
Can I trust you to document your journey?
Interesting. Yeah, let me feel into what is alive there. You can trust me to document it as much as I do, which, yeah, I expect will be some and not as much as I could try to force myself to do, but won't. Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad that you didn't resort to self-coercion,
Yeah.
because it's my like I said, I believe that there's a movement self-organizing at the moment,
Yeah.
and for the stigmergy to work, we need people leaving trails,
Mm.
and that doesn't mean you have to do it, but there are some people that are being really sophisticated in their documentation, and I'm playing a kind of librarian role
Oh, cool.
to put these handbooks next to each other and say like, hey, before you do anything, read these 5 books and
Mm.
then do your version and put it on the shelf next to it.
Cool. Cool.
So
It's
just to
neat.
say, there'll be an audience if you do documentation. There'll be an audience reading.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, I'd love to see the version of that you have so far, both for my own sake and for understanding the shape of the documentation librarianship that you're doing. And oh, I had another thought. No, I think it's covered.
Cool.
So yeah.
That's basically the microsolidarity.cc website. And it's the messy overwhelm of lots of resources and not a lot of structure or user experience, but that's just the stage that it's at for now.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, it's what I've noticed just following my inner compass is it seems like what people most need, the ones that I'm encountering, is just like get your small group practice down.
Mm-hmm.
Just get into the habit of genuine, authentic relationships in groups of 4 or 5 people. Know how to do that with one. Okay, now get 5 of those groups going. Okay, now you've actually got critical mass to start thinking about economic stuff. But start there. Basically, filter in some cool people and then do small group practice. And then,
I'm actually having a call in like an hour whose theme is like 6-ish of us who are on a Slack that is a pretty open-ended Slack are like, let's meet and talk about making money outside of day jobs. Like, and we had in one of the calls we had like the same group of us 2 days ago. I was just like, hey guys, you want to see like all my finances? I have a cool spreadsheet that like has all my finances in it. And the point wasn't how much money I have, but it's all there. Yeah. Like we were talking about like how I was, arranging it, but like there were all the amounts. And then, another guy showed his spreadsheet, which is different and had a whole double entry thing. And mine was more visual. It has like, little bars that appear when you have more money. Like, yeah, yeah, super good. Anyway, and so yeah, so we're feeling into that, space of vulnerability around the finances, and it's like, are these going to be the people that I'm working on these projects with? Well, maybe, but it's also partially a whole business dating thing, right? Like just vibing with people and different levels of that. So
mixed with a little exposure therapy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to say good night or good morning or whatever. Yes. Good day, good time zone.
Good.
Until next time.
Good time. I'm going to say good time.
Bye, buddy.
Bye.